Hi everybody, here we are at the end of 2021. It's going to be New Year in about 3 or 4 days. And lately I've been putting together some thoughts on what I consider to be the biggest delusions that are plaguing humanity in the present world. I've been thinking about this for quite a while because it slowly dawned on me over many years. It took me a long time to accept this, but most people in the world, from what I can tell, or at least half of them, or to varying degrees, don't really want to live in so-called reality. They don't really quite want the truth of our existence. Most people want a sort of hybrid fantasy truth. It often strikes me that the subconscious delusions, the subconscious fantasies, are much more out in the open regarding things in the past. I think it's because we don't have those delusions as strongly now as we used to have. But if you were actually living in that time with the limited resources and the limited scientific knowledge of the world and all that kind of thing, would you have been able to resist those delusional beliefs, especially given the peer pressure to hold those beliefs as well? At the same time, that makes me think a lot about, well, what kind of subconscious delusions do we have in the Western world now? What are the dominant subconscious delusions that control our lives as individuals and as a collective? Having the wrong delusions and prioritizing those delusions, those fantasies, it creates an imbalance, and we end up making bad decisions both as individuals and collectively because we've got utopian, stupid fantasies that are unrealistic, and we prioritize the achievement of those utopian fantasies at the cost of many other things in our lives. And I made a lot of notes recently on what I consider to be 12 of the most prominent, or maybe not prominent, 12 of the most powerful delusions that seem to be held by modern civilization here in the West. I'm not trying to make you agree with everything on all 12 of these points. I just want to give you food for thought because I think a lot of these things aren't really getting talked about so much. All right, so let's get into it with the first on the list, which is what I call the interstellar delusion. Interstellar, obviously, space travel, science fiction, and sometimes science publications and news reports about space technology and stuff has tended to given we in the West a little bit of a delusion. I think it's a subconscious delusion that we are destined to travel to the stars as a race, that we're destined to free ourselves from Earth and colonize other planets and travel to other solar systems and spread our seed possibly throughout the galaxy in the long term. We're starting off with a very grand concept here, but I think it's a subconscious delusion that we tend to hold as a society. And I talked a bit about this in a video that I did about 2001: A Space Odyssey called Horror of the Void. And I talked about how that movie presents the vast blackness of space as being this absolutely terrifying, hostile place where humans, it's so difficult for us to exist, without gravity, without resources, and so on. And I mean, you could just go and have a look at that video and get a lot more information on this particular point, but I'll mention a few basic aspects of it here. One is the uninhabitability of other planets. I mean, we've only really got our own solar system to look at here, and we don't really have any planets that are serious contenders for human populations to easily live on. I mean, certainly not without helmets and stuff on. You've got Venus and Mars are the nearest things. I mean, we haven't even managed to create space bases on the moon. It's just like this is a fantasy that existed way back in the 1950s and 60s, and we had this thing, oh, we're landing on the moon. This is our first step for mankind towards the stars. And we haven't even taken a second step. We've sent some unmanned satellites out to take pictures and take readings of the planets and stuff, and it takes the satellites years and years and years just to get to Jupiter, you know. And the size of our own solar system is astoundingly fucking large when you go and actually read up on the maths on it. For example, if you take a grapefruit, put it on the table, and you say, oh, that's the sun, then the Earth would be something like, I don't know, 2 streets away, you know, and it would be like the size of a grain of rice. And then Pluto would be something like a fucking mile away. You know, it's crazy how big our own solar system is. And then you've got, you know, Pluto has to revolve all the way around this grapefruit on the table, you know, and I think it takes, I can't remember how many hundreds or thousands of years for it to go around the sun. Our own solar system is unbelievably large, and we have done fuck all to populate it. And then if you start looking at the difficulty to get to nearest stars, it's like, you know, I think the nearest star to our one is considered to be, I think that it's been estimated at 4 light years of travel. But how the hell are we going to get across that distance? We don't know how to get at the speed of light. There's no indications as of yet from science that we're ever going to be able to achieve the speed of light. Some scientists talk about this hibernation thing. You know, you could send humans off, put them in hibernation for thousands of years as they travel off to the nearest star, and then when they get there, they wake up. But we haven't got any scientific evidence yet that we can actually do that kind of hibernation. So all of this stuff is science fiction fantasy, and yet so much policy and so much money was spent on space exploration stuff, with the idea, with the utopian fantasy that we were going to be able to get out and colonize the stars and the galaxy and so on. And I see no evidence as of yet that that is ever going to happen. It may not ever happen. Okay, so that's the delusion number one, the interstellar fantasy. Oh, I'll just expand there. You know, if you look at the issue of planets being able to support humans, you'd have to get a planet with a very similar gravity to Earth. You'd have to get similar air density. You know, you don't want the thickness of the atmosphere to be too thick, too thin. You need to have the right balance of oxygen, and there's so many thousands of factors that have to be present on another planet in order for us to be able to set foot on that planet and live on it without having a spacesuit on, a space helmet, and an oxygen tank, and all the rest of it. And if we did find a planet like that and we set foot on it, we would probably be dead almost within hours because of all the alien bacteria and stuff that would be present. We'd only have to take a few breaths of air and we would get all these alien microorganisms into our body that would probably kill us within hours or days. And when you think about it all that way, it's like the chances of humans ever being able to set foot on another planet and breathe without a helmet, unlikely. Number two is the transhuman delusion. And so not everybody out there who's watching this will have heard about this transhuman thing. A lot of you will. It pops up in news media now and then. It pops up in movies now and then. It's this idea that humans confuse themselves directly with computers. And some scientists are actually pushing this idea that we're going to be able to upload our minds to computers so that we can then live forever in computer form. And when you think about it, that's just basically a replacement for the immortality fantasy that was present in a lot of religious beliefs, which many of us have now abandoned those beliefs. I'm not atheist myself. I'm agnostic. I don't know if there's a God. If there is one, I don't know what the hell he's about or what the hell he is, if it's even a he. I'm agnostic, so I'm not either way on this. But this transhuman thing I consider to be a big delusion. This is quite a conscious delusion, actually, because it gets talked about a lot. So yeah, it's the religious element, replacements of the afterlife fantasy. But I find that, the science, the so-called science behind this transhuman delusion, I find that the scientific ideas are quite delusional as well, because the human mind is intrinsically fused with the physical brain, and the brain itself is massively fused with the physical body. The brain cannot exist without the human body. It reacts to the body, it's maintained by the human body, and our minds are heavily built around that. You know, if you have a dream, you don't just exist as an entity, a mental entity in a dream. When we dream, we have our physical body with us in the dream. You know, we dream that we walk, we dream that we talk, that we eat, whatever. You know, that's how fused the mind is with the body. And so even if we could take the human mind and upload it to a computer, I think the separation from the human body would be such a trauma, it would just drive that mind absolutely insane. Not that I even think it's possible anyway. There's also the issue that this idea that putting the mind into a computer equals life everlasting, well, that's not quite true, because just as the human body erodes over time, so do computers. Computer components, I mean, they may last for a very long time, but they erode and they become redundant and defunct and so on. And sometimes information gets transferred from one machine to the other, and there's flaws in the information, there's little discrepancies and, all that kind of thing. So computers don't last forever anyway. And so just because you put a human mind in a computer wouldn't make it last forever. Somebody's got to maintain that computer. What if somebody else comes along and is like, well, that computer, we don't really need that anymore. Why are we spending all this time keeping the mind of a person from 2 centuries ago alive in a computer form? We don't really need that, so let's just scrap that computer, and then that mind is gone. But then the other version of the transhuman thing is the idea that we can gradually turn ourselves into computers. Instead of uploading our mind to a computer, we add all kinds of physical changes to the body which involve computerized and robotic components. And, we could point to things like when people get like steel plates put inside if somebody has a broken or shattered bone or a crack in the skull, and they might get like some sort of a metal plate attached to the skull, or a broken bone may involve a permanent metal attachment inside the body to hold that bone together. We could look at things like that and say, oh yes, we are on our way to becoming human-machine hybrids. I think that's pretty weak, really, because we don't really do that with the human mind. And I know there's various bits of research that says, oh, we can put electrodes into the minds, the brains of mice and make them do this and do that. And well, I went and read up about that stuff, and a lot of the claims by the scientists and by the media were massively overblown. When you actually go and read the core information, the original publications, I often find that the achievements are massively exaggerated and distorted, probably to gain money, to gain investment, and to gain some sort of positive media coverage. I haven't seen any evidence yet that we're on our way at all to being able to fuse the human mind with computer components so that we have the abilities of a computer built into our brain. I've not seen any evidence of that. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but at the moment, I consider it a delusion. Another thing is regarding the so-called uploading of our minds to computers, it wouldn't actually be us. It would be a copy of us uploaded to a computer. We would still die, and the computer version of us would just be a sort of programmed estimation, a programmed imitation of who the living person really was. So that doesn't lead to immortality. And also, if you could fuse people with machines, would it make us happier? I mean, I've noted a few little things here. Who decides what kinds of components and programs get installed in a human-robot hybrid? Do you get to choose it for yourself, or does somebody else choose it for you? And for what purposes would it be chosen? Would you be forced to have them? If you had computer components in your mind, and then you're told, oh, you have to get this installation, like say with your mobile phone, you can't continue to use your operating system on your mobile phone unless you update it with the latest installments, updates to the system. What if that was the case? You know, you had your brain fused with computer stuff, and then whatever company designed those kinds of components says, oh well, you have to keep getting upgrades to your brain from us. And what if you don't like those upgrades? That sounds like a horror scenario to me. And so it's quite possible that, you know, I've stated it quite clearly in my notes here, that freeing people from mortality and the general limitations of their organic self could actually result in a much greater level of enslavement and unhappiness. So yeah, I think this whole transhuman thing is one hell of a delusion, but it's surprising how many people are actually into this, and especially even in the scientific community. And there's a lot of funding goes into this stuff, and I think it's driven by this utopian delusion. Okay, so number 3 is the warless world delusion. No more wars, no more killing. Yeah, and often this is based on the idea that if we end all nation states and remove all borders, and get rid of competing nation-state bureaucracies, then they won't need to go to war with each other, and we'll all live peacefully, happily ever after. Now, this isn't actually new. This has existed in history in lots of different forms. There have been various leaders throughout history who've decided, hey, you know, I want to take over the whole world and run things because I'll make it all good and utopian. And but the thing is, there's a basic problem there with the definition of war itself. It's often assumed, it seems to be subconsciously assumed, that war is, by definition, a nation-state versus nation-state affair. But it's not. War existed between tribes in the past. It exists in neighbourhoods. When you get local gangs of drug dealers fighting each other for years, that's a war. You know, and it doesn't involve any bureaucracy or a nation state. It's just groups of people fighting each other. And this exists on all kinds of levels. You get wars within nation states. You get regions within nations that fight with each other. So ending the nation state and removing all of the legally created borders in itself does not prevent war. I think what would basically happen then is that if you removed all the nation states, then the regions themselves would begin to act like nations. They would begin to compete with each other, create their own local laws and so on. And you're right back to a nation state issue, even if you don't call them nation states. Another issue with that is that nature itself creates borders. It does it with land masses. You know, it's no matter what you do, no matter how you organize your collective systems in the world, you will still have the simple fact that we've got this continent there, that continent there. This continent has its own challenges in terms of natural resources and temperature and that kind of thing, and this one has completely different ones. And so the decisions that need to be made for this continent and that continent are very different based upon what nature has provided for each. And that means that the same decisions can't be applied to both sides. Each side needs to make its own determined choices, and you're right back to a nation-state system again. And then you've got, within continents, you've got regions that are separated by deserts or mountains or huge rivers and so on. Nature itself creates borders, and we humans get grouped together within those various borderlines. We could even say that, I mean, I haven't really looked this up, but does war always have to be violent? I mean, we have democracy where we compete with each other in groups to vote people in or vote them out, to vote certain groups in or out. Could you call democracy war? I mean, it's competition just because it doesn't involve violence, but it does involve a hell of a lot of fierce competition and trying to manipulate each other and so on. If that's the case, if democracy itself is a form of war, then in order to end all wars, we'd have to end democracy. But then what are you left with? And then you've got the issue of the weapons of war. If you're going to say that war is only defined by the violent aspect of it, you know, groups being violent to each other, that's war. and say that democracy isn't war, then that's a definition that I would probably be okay with. But if you go by the use of violent weapons, in order to end war, we'd have to get rid of all the weapons that we've got. I mean, if you keep them, then obviously there's an intention to have some sort of war, whether it's offensive or defensive. And you'd have to tell all the scientists in the world, stop inventing these things. You'd have to withdraw all the funding from all the scientific communities that create weapons of war. Because this is something that hardly ever gets talked about. We talk about wars in terms of politicians and militaries and how evil and twisted they are, but yet we don't really talk very much about the technicians who create weapons of war. And, the wars wouldn't really be possible on the level that we've had them if you didn't have technicians inventing and creating and maintaining tanks and guns and bombs and nuclear warheads and all this kind of thing. We'd have to scrap all that. We'd have to stop giving the people the funding to invent that stuff. And I guess we'd have to ban the invention of new weapons. So I think all of this is quite a tall order. Wars are never going to end. It's always going to be a part of human civilization. Wish that wasn't the case, but, there you go. The fourth delusion is the equality delusion. And, oh, God, this is a heavy one. We hear it all the time now. Equality, equality, equality. In the news media, on TV shows, in books, it's all over the place. But I think the truth is there's no such thing as equality. We humans are all different to each other. Each individual person who's watching this video, you are unique. There's nobody else who is exactly like you. There's nobody else who has precisely the same skills and abilities as you. We all look different for a start. We can't really change that. You could sort of say, oh, well, we're all born equal. You hear that one a lot. But we're not born equal. We all look different as babies. You can recognize one baby from the other. And this isn't a construct of human civilization. It's not a false construct. This is a construct of nature. Nature creates inequality, ironically, as a form of evolution. You get within this individual species, you get all kinds of individuals, individual creatures. Let's say wolves. All wolves are not exactly the same. Each wolf has its own unique genetics and so on. And it's through the mating process of different types of different unique wolves that you get an evolution. If all the creatures within an individual species were genetically exactly the same, then the species wouldn't be able to evolve. So inequality between individuals within a species is a requirement for evolvement. And that goes completely against this idea that we can achieve a universal equality among human beings. And also the very existence of hierarchies, which we get in other species of social animals across the whole natural world, that in itself shows that, genetically and with evolution, it's just hierarchies are a natural part of human existence. And often it's driven by violence, but not always by violence. You look at, primates and stuff. It's not just about the violence. Sometimes the most violent member within a social community of species, even non-human, sometimes the most violent one can be rejected and can actually be even beaten up and killed by the rest of the collective if that individual is too violent. So it's not always a case of the hierarchies being violent. Now, in humanity, we seem to have been putting a great deal of effort into trying to get rid of the violent hierarchy and replacing it with an intelligence hierarchy, a financial hierarchy, a bureaucratic hierarchy. And there are definitely arguments to say that those forms of hierarchy are more desirable than having the violent hierarchy. But the violent hierarchy is still fused into it. For example, the bureaucratic hierarchy. It can't do its thing. It can't make its decisions and get us to all follow it without having the ability to impose violence. So we have police forces and military and so on. And, if the bureaucracy creates a bunch of laws and says, oh, you shall not do this, If you break those laws, then the bureaucratic hierarchy has to send in the violent elements of its own hierarchy to attack you. But the point is, how can we have universal equality if we've got hierarchies? If you have an intelligence hierarchy or a bureaucratic hierarchy, a financial or academic hierarchy, that's not equality. If you're saying that this person is qualified to make a decision and this person isn't, then those two people are not equal. So yeah, this whole equality thing is it's a utopian fantasy. I'm not saying that we shouldn't strive to try and give people more equal footing on various levels. We should. But if we over-prioritize it and ignore the fact that hierarchies are actually required for human civilization to exist, then that's a problem. Okay, next up, the end of capitalism delusion. Well, again, like with the war issue, we get back to the problem of definitions. What is capitalism? I mean, there's various descriptions of this about that are out there, and the fact that the descriptions vary so much shows that capitalism isn't specifically defined. But to me, all forms of trade are capitalism. So if you get rid of the monetary system, no more cash, no more banks, anything like that, people will still continue to trade in the form of barter. Oh, I'll give you this box of seeds so that you can grow some carrots, and in return you give me I don't know, a bunch of bananas or whatever. And funny example, but yeah, I mean that's barter, and that is capitalism. Because what if one person gives like only a couple of bananas and the other person gives like lots of seeds, and it's like either side could turn around and say, well, you got too much off me, it wasn't an equal trade, so you're being a capitalist, even though no money was used in the transaction. So that's true with barter. And yeah, I mean, any kinds of favors or rewards that people give each other regarding, favors or rewards for good or bad behavior, those can be argued to be forms of capitalism. If you say to your kid, behave yourself or you're not getting an ice cream after dinner, you could be looked upon as an evil capitalist who is suppressing the child who has a right to the ice cream that they want for the dessert. And yeah, so I mean, it's human nature that we trade, and trade itself is arguably the core basis of human civilization. I've heard it said that war is the core basis. I don't think it is. I think trade is the basis. Trade is what has created all of the physical resources that we have to make our lives work. It's what created that camera that I'm using to film in this right now. And in order to end capitalism, you'd have to end trade. It's just so stupid. And yet so many people pursue this idea that we can get rid of capitalism completely. However, at the same time, I do think there is an important issue that is built into the let's end capitalism argument. And that is the issue of monopolies. Industry monopolies are a big problem because it gives certain corporations or governments if they have the monopoly, it gives them too much power over other people. And especially if they've got a monopoly on something which the population needs, like, I don't know, water supply, that can give too much power, and that's an issue. However, ending trade itself is not the answer to stopping monopolies. I mean, it's a very interesting thing. I've made a note here about this massive irony. A lot of people talk about hating the nation state and wanting to end the nation state, and yet they are very much for nationalization of key industries like water, gas, transportation, and so on. So how can you be for nationalization of industries and yet be against the nation state itself? And aside from that point, even if you do nationalize an industry, that doesn't end the monopoly. Sometimes a state-run monopoly can be even worse than a market-based monopoly. When you hand over an industry to the state to run, you are giving them the ultimate monopoly because they are allowed to actually say, well, no competitor can exist in terms of providing this particular product or service. And that can be just as bad. So yeah, Ending capitalism I consider to be a massive delusion, and yet so many people still push and push and push for that. Oh, by the way, I don't believe in any particular ideology. I don't buy into any of them. So for those of you saying, oh, you're pro-capitalist, not necessarily. I'm just acknowledging the basic function of trade as part of human civilization, and you cannot delete that. Next up, we've got a bit of a heavy one here, as if we haven't been covering heavy ones already. The end of child abuse delusion. Now, this is the one that disturbs me most, and I find the most sad out of all of them on this list. Child abuse has always gone on. And I'm talking both physical and psychological, because psychological child abuse can be just as horrendous as the physical. Some parents are absolutely terrible to their kids. But it's not just about parents as well. I mean, physical or psychological abuse of kids, it can come from siblings, and siblings can do an incredible amount of damage to the other kids. It can come from other family members, it can come from neighbours, and especially bullying from other kids. Bullying between children I consider to be a form of child abuse. Just because it's committed by other kids doesn't mean it's not child abuse. Now, the reason I find this the most disturbing one on the list and the hardest to accept, it's not just because of feeling the empathy for the helpless child and what they go through for many, many years. It's also because a hell of a lot of criminals in life, a lot of criminal behaviour stems from a bad childhood, being taught the wrong values, and the abuse during childhood teaches the person that, oh, abusing people is the way that you survive and get on in this world. And then they go out and act out that kind of thing as adults. I think that's a huge problem plaguing humanity. But how do you end it? I mean, I was really racking my brains thinking about this. How do you end child abuse in this world completely? And basically, you'd have to have 24-hour monitoring of every baby from the day it's born right through its whole childhood. And you'd have to actually monitor the pregnant mothers as well, because I've seen in the past when I've worked in homeless hostels, you get pregnant women who go out and smoke and drink heavily during pregnancy, take drugs, and you can end up with a kid who is fucked up from the day of birth because of that. But you can get a baby born as a drug addict, and it's like, fuck, what kind of start in life is that? So you'd have to have 24-hour monitoring of the mother during the pregnancy, and then of the child throughout their life, to make sure that no abuse is going on. And how would you do that? Would you have people present there? Would you have cameras everywhere? Would you have audio equipment set up in the home? What if the parent takes the kid out for the day? How do you continue the monitoring if they take the kid out to the park, if they go for a drive? If they go for a walk in the forest with a kid, how do you monitor the behaviour then? So I was thinking about this. If you manage to get like a huge amount of camera and audio monitoring of a child throughout its whole life, not that you could do it in all contexts, but if you could do it in most of the contexts, the kinds of people who would be likely to abuse kids, they would still find ways of working around it. They would find ways of sabotaging the monitoring equipment. They would find out places where they could get away with the abuse. Say if you had a room like this and it had cameras that kept track so that you couldn't abuse your kid, then the parents might figure out, oh, well, if I take the kid just in that part of the hallway there, there's no camera on me there, or if I close the doors, nothing can be heard, and then I can psychologically abuse the kid for while I'm there. It's impossible. And unfortunately, I think this basically means that child abuse is always going to be a part of human civilization. And the idea that we can somehow stamp it all out, unfortunately, it's a delusion. Number 7 now is the end of discrimination delusion. I guess grand subjects here, it's just like, whoa, Anyway, so Well, I've wrote here, all forms of reward and punishment are discrimination. We've already talked about the reward and punishment in relation to one or two of the other issues, because rewards and punishment involve treating a person differently. Yes, I mean, if you take one person, you say, oh, you committed the crime, you're going to prison. That is a form of discrimination. And it's arguably a good form of discrimination in certain circumstances. So, this idea that discrimination is always bad. No, we should discriminate. If we invite 50 people to apply for a job and we choose the one who we think is being most suitable for the job, who will do the best job, we are discriminating against the people who we choose not to give that job to. And this happens all over the place. I mean, sexual attraction, your choice of partner in life. If you're attracted to one person but not another, that's discrimination. If you choose to marry this person but not that person, that's discrimination. We discriminate all the time in our lives, even in choice of products. If you go into a shop and you decide, I'm going to buy this brand instead of that brand, that's discrimination. If you choose to watch this YouTube channel and not another one, that's discrimination. It's just, discrimination happens everywhere. But again, we get this problem with these broad terms. End all war. We need to create universal equality. We need to stop all forms of discrimination. It's just so stupid. Often it's a case of a lack of specificity in the verbal descriptions. Another thing is that when we repress discrimination, it resurfaces subconsciously, and you get this thing gets talked about a lot in what was it they call it, unconscious racial bias. You get these supposed experts who go into companies and government organizations, and they teach people how not to be racist, even though those people probably aren't really racist in the first place. And when those people can argue that they're not racist, the person will say, oh, you've got subconscious racial bias. I can't remember the exact term for it, but it's basically arguing that you are a racist, you just don't realize it. And often they don't actually provide any evidence for that. It's just a claim. Well, that could be argued to go on in all kinds of other contexts. I wrote down some here. Okay, yeah, unconscious racial bias, no doubt it does exist. I'm not saying it always exists when it's claimed to exist, but sometimes it does. You've got unconscious bureaucratic abuse. People who hold bureaucratic positions and convince themselves that they're doing the things for the greater good, but they actually subconsciously doing things that are abusive of people for their own reasons. You've got unconscious bullying. You've got unconscious defamation. Oh, that's a big one. If you make a joke about someone in front of a group of people and everyone has a little giggle and laugh, oh, that was so funny, and even the person who got joked about has a giggle, you could argue in that circumstance that it was an unconscious defamation against that person if there was a little bit of an insult thrown. Unconscious playing the victim is a big one. There's a lot of currency in victimhood these days. If you can persuade people that you are being discriminated against and that somebody else is a discriminator even though they are not, then you are actually engaging in discrimination by doing that. When you deliberately play the victim, it does happen a lot. And the last one I wrote here is kind of a funny one, but I think it's got some truth. We discriminate against discriminators. So if somebody says something that is considered to be, a hate crime or a speech crime or whatever, and that person can be fined or even put in prison just for saying something that is considered to be discriminatory, that in itself is discrimination. We discriminate against people who we perceive to be discriminators. So it's kind of like, like we had in order to stop terrorism, we must become terrorists. So in order to stop war, we must wage war. This kind of stupid logic happens all the time. And discriminating against discriminators, that shows that the people who are doing that actually are aware that there are circumstances in life where discrimination is a useful and important function of society. That's a simple case. So I think it's basically a language problem. The word discrimination needs to be replaced with something much more specific. And unfortunately, that usually means having a longer, more detailed description. like you would get with a legal clause. But then people don't find that so easy to remember. It's much easier to just throw around a simple word like discrimination and say, I'm against discrimination. We need to stop all discrimination. And yet we all discriminate every day in our lives in ways that are often quite acceptable. Right, what have we got next here? Number 8 is the human level artificial intelligence delusion. Now, I made a video about this quite a few years ago, and I'll put the link in the video description below, and I'll show it on screen here. This idea that we can create artificial intelligence that has the abilities and the versatility of a human mind. And this has been, like with the space race thing, this has been getting promised and promised and promised. And, oh, we are getting there. We've been talking about this since the 1950s, 1960s, and it still ain't happening. Still today, humans have never made any machine, any computer that is self-aware. It's never happened. And part of the way that we argue against that, well, we don't, but a lot of people who are proponents of human level artificial intelligence try to get around this is by, they often sort of claim that human choice and human consciousness and human thought doesn't really exist, and that we humans basically are just machines, and that's it. And that's the kind of way of getting around this idea of computers not being self-determined and not having awareness, not being able to actually think for themselves. And so, yeah, I put the phrase there, that's the terminology, they deny that consciousness exists, which is almost like saying the thoughts don't exist. How can you think the thoughts don't exist? You know, it's pretty silly. And you get a lot of manipulation of language in this whole AI research field. Terms like machine learning. I've never heard of a machine that actually learns. All machines and all computer programs, as far as I know, are completely automated. You may give an incredible amount of complexity to the automation so that the machine can respond to it has more variables that it can respond to. But still, the machine is only following an automated program. No matter how complex you make it, it's still only automation. So yeah, I think this idea of human level artificial intelligence is a big delusion, and it's one I actually find it really funny because we get so much of it in sci-fi movies and in the news media, and all this talk about humans are going to be made redundant mentally by machines that can think better and stuff like that. No, they're just tools. It's like saying a hammer is going to replace the human hand. Oh, well, you know, the hammer can be used to knock things into walls and, you know, it's better than the human hand. Or a toolbox is going to replace the human hand. So you got a toolbox, you know, hammer, fucking screwdrivers, spanners and all the rest of it. And you can do great things with that stuff. But it's useless without the human hand to control it. And that's exactly the same thing with all of the computers and robots. Yeah, so go and check out that video that I did on it, which was, I think it's called 10 Reasons Why Human Level AI is a False Promise. Yeah, so I just went over that briefly here, but it's one of the major delusions. The next one, the end of crime delusion. Yeah, crime is always going to exist, always has, always will. And part of the problem is that crime itself is defined by written or verbally spoken laws that are bureaucratically put in place. And, you know, criminals have always found ways to work around. And that's one of the reasons why legal systems have to keep changing and adapting all the time, is because the criminals keep looking at the law and looking at the way it's worded, and they notice the loopholes, the flaws in the way the law is worded. And, oh, well, the law says you can't do this, but it doesn't say anything about that, so I'll go and sneak my way around that law by doing that. That has always gone on, still goes on. So you've got this ever-evolving battle between verbal descriptions written in law as to what constitutes a crime and what the punishment should be. And then you've got the criminals working their way around it because language is imperfect in the first place. So for that reason alone, crime will always exist. And it's not just about the people going out and doing the crimes, it's also about the lawyers. One of the big things that lawyers do is manipulate language and look for flaws in language from the other side. They look for flaws in language of the written laws, flaws in the language that is spoken by the judge. And lawyers can be pretty inventive at doing what you could arguably call semantic crime, where they use verbal manipulations to try and get somebody freed, to prevent someone from being sentenced for something that they've actually done by manipulating the wording to make it seem like the crime didn't happen, or it can be done the other way around. The law firms are famous for being able to do that kind of thing. You've also got, across the globe, you've got different laws in different countries, and you've got the laws changing over time anyway. And so the law is never perfect. The legal system is never a perfect description of what should and shouldn't be considered a crime, because it's changing all the time, and because it's different all over the globe. What's legal in one country is illegal in another country. This shows that the legal definitions of crime are not fixed, and they're certainly not perfect. And so for that reason, a person used to get this in America. You get like serial killers who would go and commit crimes in a state where there was no death penalty, so that they wouldn't have to face death if they got caught for their crimes. And you can get this all over the world. People can move from one place to another in order to get away from a law that they don't like, and go to a place where that crime is permitted. So that's another one. You also need police forces in place to enforce the laws because they get broken. And I've never heard of a single law ever being written that didn't get broken. But at the same time, I tend to think that there's kinds of like subconscious moral codes that exist for different populations, and those moral codes, they differ from one civilization to another as well. Right across the earth right now, there are different moral codes that exist within different cultures, and often those subconscious moral codes among the population, sometimes they might even be conscious to a large degree, often that overrides the written laws. We see this a hell of a lot. What people consider to be right and wrong very often mismatches what the law says, and often their own personal perception of right and wrong drives their behavior more than the law does. So that's a huge thing as well. But we have like court buildings and courtroom attire, and courtroom procedures that gives the impression that the written laws, the bureaucratically written laws in a country, all of that grandiose courtroom drama thing gives the impression that the written laws are much more powerful than they actually are. But those written laws are basically just opinions written by people who are deemed to be experts in the field. So yeah, crime will never end. Okay, we're not far off the finish here. At number 10, we have the end of offence delusion. Oh God, this one is just unbelievable. And most of you will be aware of this anyway, but I'm going to talk a little bit about it. First of all, offence is in the eye of the beholder. It's very often wrong. I think most offence that is taken is completely wrong, because you can have like half a dozen people in the same situation who get treated in the same way, and one person might take offence and the other 5 don't. So does that mean that the person who took offence was right to take offence? Not necessarily. Or somebody else might take offence in a completely different way, and they can't both be right about it. But this attitude that if somebody takes offence, then it's the other person's fault that they took offence. But the term take offence actually gives ownership to the person who takes offence. Taking offence is something people choose to do. Okay? It's not something that's forced on them. I can't make offence against you, but you can take offence from me if that's what you choose to take. The actual word offend is a funny one as well. I haven't really looked into the etymology of this, but I find the word offend funny because it's like off end. So if I offend you, does that mean I'm pushing you off the end of something? I don't know. I just find that really funny. And what is it I'm pushing you off? Um, yeah. So offence is chosen and is often stated. Oh, I've taken offence at that. But usually that is said in order to silence valid critiques and disagreements from other people. Oh, I'm offended. You shouldn't say that. Well, that's your own fault. If you choose to take offence, that's your own fault. There are very few instances I find of people taking offence where it was actually the fault of the person who spoke in the first place. There are often, when the other person speaks, there are multiple ways of interpreting what they say. And the other person chooses to take offence. The person who takes offence, it's usually their own fault. That's what I find. I know a ton of you are going to argue like fuck with me about this, but I'm saying it anyway. And actually, I'll add to this. I'll end with a little jokey one here, and I wrote it. I'll read it the way I've wrote it down here. If I get offended by people who get offended and they don't shut up, then it proves that they know that offence is sometimes justified. And number 11, the everlasting species delusion. This is only a short one, but I think this is a subconscious thing that exists for our civilization in the Western world today, probably across the globe as well. And this is regarding both humans and animals. Okay, our own belief that we will survive as a species and somehow the human race will never end. I think that ties in with the first delusion that I had on this about the interstellar travel. If you take the interstellar travel delusion out of the equation, then the human race cannot survive indefinitely, because at some point the Earth will be destroyed, at some point the sun will go supernova or whatever it's going to do, and that will kill all life on Earth. So unless we find a way to do interstellar travel, and we've got no evidence that we can do that yet, then the human race will be destroyed, and all of its art and culture and history and everything will all be destroyed along with it. Not the most pleasant thought, but that doesn't mean that our existence was pointless or for nothing, But also regarding animals, we talk a lot about, we must save this species, save that species. And yeah, sure, okay, we should try and save quite a few of the species, especially ones that are important to the ecosystems. Although it's a bit selfish to say, we only want this organism to survive because it's important to our ecosystem. It's like, what about the creature in itself? But yeah, I mean, nature kills off species at a way faster rate than we humans ever do. The amount of species that have existed on Earth over hundreds of millions of years that have evolved and then been wiped out, it's way more than we humans have wiped out. The nature itself does not create species to last forever. It wipes them out all the time. And actually, this what I said there about our choice of what kinds of organisms need to be saved and not saved on Earth ties in with the discrimination thing. I mean, if there's some particular microorganism that we find is hostile to us and we set out to try and eliminate that organism from the Earth, is that really any more ethical than saying, we need to save the whales because it's not fair that the whales should be wiped out? Now, I don't want the whales wiped out. But is it really any more ethical to say, we're going to wipe out Ebola, or we're going to wipe out smallpox? It's an organism. Actually, there's some scientific debate over whether these things are actually organisms. But say there's some particular bacteria, a single-celled organism, and we consider it to be a problem to our existence. Maybe it kills too many of us or something. Is it ethical for us to say we're going to wipe that out because we don't like it? Maybe nature prefers that particular organism. I don't know. So all that's up in the air. But yeah, all the species on Earth, including ourselves, are not designed to last for all eternity. They will all be wiped out, including us. And the final delusion is the historical superiority delusion. And this one I've been finding pretty interesting because I've read quite a few books in my life. I don't read all the time, but I've read a lot of stuff. And I find that when I go back and look at history books, you're going back centuries. In fact, I think I briefly mentioned this earlier in this video, but I've included it here as a major point. People in the past may not have been as stupid as we thought they were. And they may not have been as socially backward as we thought they were. If you brought those people to here, to this time, sure, they would be massively impressed with all the technology, but they might ethically find some of the ways that we exist today to be, what the fuck are you people doing? They might see things like hardcore pornography and view modern civilization as being utterly depraved. You know, if you go back over the centuries, I think we tend to have this collective subconscious delusion that humanity is always moving forward. Scientific technology is always getting better and better, and social development of the species is always getting better and better. But that's not necessarily the case. In fact, it's not even the case with technology and industry. I mean, you get a lot of people talk about, these particular products years ago used to do a better job and the new versions are crap. The new versions are designed to fail after a certain amount of time so that they need replacement parts and maintenance to make more profits for the manufacturer, whereas the old ones were built to last. That happens in a lot of technology and industry. And on that kind of basis, you can say that tech doesn't necessarily move forward at an ever-improving pace. Sometimes it goes backward, and it could even be argued to permanently go backward in some instances. And socially, we're not necessarily moving forward either. I mean, you'll have to look at the last 2 years and the way our society has gone, whether justified or not, and our lives are not better for it. They're a lot worse for it in a lot of ways. This historical superiority delusion, I think it's a major one, because I think it makes a lot of people not look critically at the present. And I think it makes a lot of people very dismissive of the past. Oh, that was just when they were stupid and inferior in the past, so I don't need to take any notice of that. But I find if you go back and read books written by people 50, 100 years ago, maybe centuries ago, you often find really good insights in those books that don't get communicated now, either because they've been forgotten or because if people do have those thoughts now, they're afraid to publish them because they think they're going to be attacked for saying it and stuff like that. So the historical superiority delusion is one that we need to drop, and I suggest that you expand your mind on these kinds of issues by exploring a larger history of intellectual thought that has been published. And arguably today, the fact that it's so easy to create and publish media content. I mean, here's me. I just scribbled up these notes a few days ago, and I'm taking a few hours out here to write, to record this little presentation, and I'll blast this out there, and I can reach thousands and thousands of people with this video. Whereas that wasn't really possible in the past. You had to write an actual book and get someone to publish it. And so you could say that the ease with which a person can create media content today has, across the board, has reduced the quality of the content. The market of ideas, of intellectual ideas, it can be argued that the market has been flooded by low quality content. And who knows, maybe my content is part of that lower grade quality. It's just an interesting little take on the whole historical superiority delusion. Okay, folks, so that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this. Hope it gives you plenty of food for thought. Now, I'm going to be a full-on capitalist, and I'm going to promote my merchandise, which I just got out there about a week or two ago. And so I ordered a couple myself, and we've got the Collative Learning t-shirt there. Very nice. And we've got a nice Collative Learning mug. And there's a bunch of other items, caps and stuff like that. The link to all that is in the video description below. I know most of you won't be interested in merchandise, but some are, and for those who are, go and check it out. Okay, so I've got a whole bunch of other projects on the go here. So yeah, Utopia cancelled, which is this video that you're watching. I've got more stuff on Mirror's Edge. The alien isolation footage that I've been tirelessly working through and organising. I've almost finished organising that, so there will definitely be more videos on alien isolation. Whole bunch of new stuff is on the way. If you want to support me on Patreon, the link is in the video description below. Also, if you want some discounts on my digital downloads, I've had some up for a few weeks, but the sales will end over the next couple of days. So if you follow the link to my site in the video description below, there's about 40 items that are on sale at 40 to 60% off. These are items that you can't get on YouTube. They're paywall items. So you pay for the items, you digitally download, and yet you can get a discount on those, and they will finish around about New Year. Okay, folks, this is Rob Ager signing off. I hope you enjoyed this. Take it easy, and I hope 2022 ends up being a hell of a lot better for you than 2021 was. Okay, bye-bye.